How Things Work, the Legal Edition, which is a rapid response project that addresses how our civil rights are being impacted by actions taken by the current administration. My name is Janel George, and I'm an associate professor of law at Georgetown Law, and where I'm the founding director of the Racial Equity in Education Law and Policy Clinic. In the clinic, student attorneys engage in legislative advocacy and research to address racial inequities in education. These include resource inequities along racial lines, school segregation, and discriminatory school discipline policies and practices. And I'm joined today by GeDá Jones Herbert, who is Chief Legal Counsel with Brown's Promise and former counsel with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where she handled school desegregation cases across the country. Today, we're discussing recent federal actions that impact civil rights and access to education. Thank you so much again for joining us. We're really thrilled to welcome you to today's conversation. These videos provide a unique opportunity to address what's happening in America today, to clarify any misinformation or disinformation being spread, and to highlight how civil rights and social justice advocates can act to protect rather the rights of everyone. Today's program is entitled Dismantling the Anti-Discrimination Infrastructure, and will focus on recent federal actions, including cuts to the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights staff and mischaracterization of federal civil rights law. It's essential to examine how these issues intersect with the principles of justice and equity that guide the work of our section and the ABA generally. So I'm going to start before I hand it over to GeDá to talk about the impact of recent federal actions and what you, as civil rights and social justice attorneys and advocates, can do. I'm just going to provide a snapshot of some of these recent federal actions. The Trump administration is systematically eliminating components of the civil rights oversight and enforcement infrastructure that have been instrumental in effectuating the goals of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in particular, increase access to quality educational opportunities for all students, regardless of race or income level. It's doing this through two primary means. The first is eliminating the staff that oversees and enforces students' civil rights in our federal civil rights laws. And second, by eviscerating the legal theory known as disparate impact. Disparate impact is a legal theory under which claimants or plaintiffs can challenge otherwise facially neutral laws that don't mention race or don't mention any other protected status category like disability or age, but nevertheless disproportionately impact a protected group of people. And disparate impact is important because it acknowledges that our contemporary forms of discrimination are often covert, yet they nevertheless have the same damaging impact as more overt Jim Crow laws that have been invalidated as unconstitutional. So, what we're seeing today in terms of staffing, the Department of Education, since this administration took office, has experienced a reduction in force, or RIF, of over half of its staff, with 600 forced to take early retirement or resign. 1,300 have been fired, and of the positions eliminated, over 200 were in the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, whose primary responsibility includes reviewing, investigating, and resolving discrimination complaints. The U.S. Supreme Court recently approved the administration's demolition of the Department of Education, even though the department was made in a federal agency level department through statute by Congress, the U.S. Supreme Court's validation of these staffing cuts still allows the executive almost unilaterally to eliminate this department. And this hinders an already understaffed OCR in its responsibility to address civil rights complaints, offer guidance to states and school districts, and to comply with federal civil rights law, and otherwise fulfill its duties as enshrined in federal law. In addition, we're seeing the elimination of field offices for OCR all around the country. So 7 of OCR's 12 field offices have been shuttered, including offices in Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Dallas, New York, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. So again, that's just a snapshot and overview of some of the cuts and the changes that the executive is making to the Department of Education and to civil rights law that ensures access to educational opportunity. I'm going to turn it over to GeDá to talk more about the impact of these federal actions on students' access to education.
Thank you, Janelle, and I'm so grateful to be here. I really appreciate the framing of the current attacks on critical civil rights protections that you gave, that many American citizens lost their lives, livelihood, and dignity to achieve. As a civil rights attorney, I'm a firm believer that in order to fight the current attacks effectively, we must pause and learn from those who came before us. What we're facing today, though frustrating and sometimes even terrifying, I must admit, is not the first time that America has faced retrenchment following necessary progress. This dates back all the way to the time of Reconstruction, to the fight for civil rights during our lifetime. We've been here before, and we are equipped to utilize our power as citizens and our training as attorneys to once again protect some of our most valuable members of society. And specifically, today, I'm talking to you about our children and youth. And with this in mind, I'd like to share a video that the US Department of Justice shared just last summer for the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These words assured us that all people, regardless of race, religion, or gender, would be guaranteed equal access to liberty. However, it would take nearly 200 years and generations of struggle before people of color would see these rights realized. Equal access to voting, public spaces, public education, and employment had finally become law when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But how did the Civil Rights Act of 1964 come to pass? What was the Justice Department's role in its creation? In the spring of 1963, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, James Bevel, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King sought to bring attention to integration efforts in Birmingham, Alabama, and throughout the American South through nonviolent direct action known as the Birmingham Campaign. On Good Friday, King was arrested for protesting without a permit. Refusing bail, King remained with other protesters for 8 days while he wrote his famous thesis on civil disobedience, the letter from the Birmingham jail. It was in the jail cell of what King called the most segregated city in America that he penned his famous phrase, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."
And I share that video to remind us of why these civil rights protections came into being and how to begin with. Okay, so the US Department of Education and the Trump administration right now has been actively saying that it's important that we're sending education back to the states. But we know that one, the federal government has long been involved in public education way before the U.S. Department of Education, its current form, was established in 1980. Dating back to 1867, the federal government was assessing the progress of public schools across the nation to see how they were acting and ensuring that they were being effective. Now, as we know, during that time, schools were still segregated, and so students of color did not enjoy those same rights, but the federal government has long been involved in ensuring public education could thrive. Now, when we get to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, we see a lot of progress in the civil rights movement, and that's what led to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and other civil rights protections that are critical for our students today. And so going back to your question of who do these cuts harm, they harm the exact students that they were put in place to protect. And so we cannot step aside and ignore the fact that our students are and will continue to be hurt by this. We know that when the federal government withheld funds from public schools as recent as a few months ago, our public schools could not properly prepare for the upcoming school year because they did not have the funds in hand. And who are the schools most in need of these funds? Often schools that serve students of color and students from lower income backgrounds. We also know that the Office for Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education plays a critical role of protecting these important rights that our young people have. And if you want to look at data, the facts tell us that as recent as 2021, 1/3 of high school students reported to the Center for Disease Control that they had been treated badly or unfairly in school because of their race or ethnicity during their lifetime. And those came primarily from students that were Asian American, Black, and multiracial. We also know that in 2024, the Office of Civil Rights received a record high number of civil rights complaints following an increase the year prior. And overall, during the Biden administration, when the Office for Civil Rights was promoting their work and letting folks know that they are a resource for our communities, they received a 64% increase in civil rights complaints than the previous Trump administration. And that's what happens when we have a properly functioned Department of Education that is here to protect our students. And this is what we are losing when those protections go away. And that is also why it is critical that us as attorneys find alternative means to use the law to protect our young people.
GeDá, what other actions can civil rights attorneys or social advocates, social justice advocates take? What else can we do to address these recent actions?
So, unfortunately, there's not a federal right to education. The US Constitution does not provide a federal right to education, but I highly recommend that those who are interested in learning more about what that could look like refer to one of my mentors, Kimberly Jenkins Robinson, and her works on that issue. But what we do have is that every state constitution provides a right to education at some varying degrees. Some of those protections are stronger than others. We also still have our federal constitution, though. And between those state protections and the federal civil rights laws that are in place, there is an opportunity to still fight for our students, even if the federal government is not. Now, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act allow for the federal government to step in on behalf of its citizens. But though we are not able to move forward with the disparate impact protections without the federal government, we can still prove intentional discrimination as private citizens. And that's our charge for us today during this federal government moment of inaction. And I'm saying a moment because we have to be determined that it cannot last. Um, at Brown's Promise, we use state court litigation, legislative advocacy at the state level and at the federal level, and community organizing to make impactful changes toward resource equity and school integration at the local level, while supporting our partners who are fighting the attacks at the federal level. And this is a reminder that there's a place for all of us in this work, but that we don't all have to do it all. Okay, so while my organization is really focused on that state level advocacy and local level advocacy, we are working in collaboration with our partners who are fighting back at the federal level. This needs to be a moment of strategic legal advocacy where we are playing both defense and offense. Now is not the time simply to be in defense where we are trying to stop the harms that are happening. Because if we are only focused on stopping harms, we are never going to achieve equal justice under the law in America, which has always been the goal for social justice advocates. But if we work in concert, ensuring that those who are fighting at the federal level and playing defense are well resourced and supported, and those who are moving toward a more progressive, more just union are being supported as well, we can achieve the outcomes that all students deserve, which is a high quality education in every public school, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, ability, gender, or socioeconomic status.
Thank you so much. Mhm. Thank you, Jade, for shedding light on what's happening and how it's impacting the nation's most vulnerable students, as well as for highlighting what we can do at the state level, as well as the local and federal levels. To
And
everyone
if I
who,
may, I'd like to
yes,
just
please.
encourage everyone who's watching a few things that you can do in your
Mhm,
practice and in your community. One, that's to educate and inform others in and outside of the legal field. These executive
mhm.
orders, these guidance that are coming from this current administration do not have the force of law. And so it is important that you are familiarizing yourself with what the laws are on the book and informing those who are not in the legal field that these do not have the force of law so that we can prevent the intended chilling effect that these orders are trying to place on our public schools and on our children. We also have to fight back. We have to continue to challenge everything. We are winning in court, but we're only winning because we're fighting. And so we cannot capitulate. We must fight. And then finally, I encourage you all to get creative. We are in this place today because a group of individuals, not magical beings or powerful forces, but a group of individuals got together, studied the laws, and determined how that they can creatively achieve their unfortunate goals of maintaining white supremacy. But we can use their same playbook and determine what our goals are, which is a just society where all citizens are protected. And social justice advocates and all attorneys can be committed to upholding the rule of law, where everyone has an opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and justice. And so, with that in mind, we must familiarize ourselves with the laws in the books and get creative so that we can achieve the progress that our young people deserve.
Thank you so much, Jade. And I would just add to that, I encourage everyone to stay engaged with the AB's Civil Rights and Social Justice section. Become a member if you're not already one. Visit our website, explore upcoming events, and consider joining one of the committees like the Education Committee to shape the work that's being done. You can do so by visiting ambar.org/CRSJ. Thank you all again for joining us today, and we hope you also access the resources that we're sharing along with today's program. Thank you.